Cool. Welcome everybody to week 7 of the Georgetown Entrepreneurship Internship experience. Today's session is going to focus on informational interviews and basically equipping you with the skills and kind of strategy needed to talk to people that are way smarter and more experienced than you, either in the companies you're working with this summer or at other companies, so that you can learn more about their professional experience, how they got there, what do you actually do if you're an electrical engineer or a director of marketing. I don't really know, but maybe if you had coffee with somebody for 20 or 30 minutes, they could give you a lot of insight into how they got to where they are. Before we dive in, I want to kind of just go over the agenda for today. We're going to each week do a lap and just have everybody take a deep breath, introduce themselves, and then we'll go into a little bit of recapping from last week with your personal brand and what feedback you got from folks, and then go into informational interviews. So how about we get started with everybody? Maybe you can go first. Just take a deep breath. Exhale, and give us your name, your company, and job title for this summer.
I'm Lisbeth, and I'm using some of these now.
Hi, I'm Marco. I'm going to be interning for Urban Stems in the Business Intelligence Department.
Hi, I'm Christine, and I'll be something for this audience.
I'm Dick.
There we go.
Hi, I'm David. I'm going to be an intern with strategic partners. I don't know if it's partners or communications. Partners.
Hi, I'm Charlie, and I'm going to be an intern with Clutch this summer.
Hi, I'm Yuta. I will be an e-commerce intern at Georgetown.
Great. And I'm Mike, and I'm a professor here at Georgetown. So last week we talked all about your personal brand, and your assignment was to go and survey and talk to a few people and kind of get their perspective. So now I'd love to do a lap around and hear, Elizabeth, starting with you, sort of what feedback did you get from other people? What were some of the first few words that came to mind when you asked about how people saw your personal brand?
So I asked many people. I think one of the most interesting ones I asked one of my friends, and she said wellness focus. I really even thought that was an attribute of personal brand, but I do a lot of work in wellness in terms of what I work on too. And I think that'd be interesting how that kind of translates into my personal brand. I got other things like passionate, trustworthy, consistent. It was also interesting because the people I asked gave me completely different ones.
It's interesting.
Yeah, passionate, consistent, trustworthy.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. And I think as we go around too, you will learn things from how people perceive you and view you, even if you wouldn't use those adjectives you need to describe yourself. How about you, Marco?
So I tried to ask pretty diverse group of people, but one of the ones that came back up in one form or another was I got dependable, trustworthy from a few people. I asked my boss from last summer, and I said just the first 3 words, and he responded, "Oh, give me time, and I'll get back to you. How long do you need?" And I didn't know what he was doing, but he emailed me back several bulleted long sentences.
Is this a workshop? Did Christine call that?
No, that's okay.
Thank you.
So he gave you long sentences. What did they end up saying?
So I tried to distill them down as much as possible, but basically open-minded and good at adapting and talking to different people in the organization, and kind of good at communicating with them. And then also one that stuck out to me was from my debate partner from high school, was not taking myself too seriously. So.
I asked me my close friend and parents and my boss, and for my friends, the people who are close to me usually always say kind or passionate, which is how they're serving work. And for my boss, what I know is usually hardworking, entrepreneurial, and passionate as well.
I asked around with coworkers and close friends and family, and the things that came up the most were very high. They think of very high energy, which I see as a good thing, because most of all, I want to come off as genuine, because it's genuinely who I am. I I'm not faking it. Like if I'm having a good time, like smiling at work or like, pushing through things that come up. Very high energy and passionate too about what I do.
Well, like when I asked my parents, they were just like, oh, like very nice, smart, like the parent stuff. And then when I asked my friends, coffee came up a bunch. It's like spot on and then like funny.
Cool. Yeah, parents tend to have a
Yeah.
skewed perspective. They're paid to, or well, not, I guess not paid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. I was going to say like that's what they're paid to say, but they're not.
So I asked a bunch of my friends, did not think to ask my parents, but a lot of what came up, I think there are two very distinct categories. I think there was like the social side and then there's like maybe like professional, like a working environment. And the fun side, I got like effortless, social, energetic, and then the work professional side, I got like driven, opinionated. I got a lot. Don't know if that's a good thing. Outspoken and dedicated. Those are some big ones.
And so with this kind of self-awareness and information, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on how you can bring that to your internships this summer and how you might be able to approach your positions or like new people you're working with to either help them see this part of your personal brand or something else? What do you guys think?
One of the ones I got was shy, which I like kind of felt like I want to improve, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know, I got like the combination of like shy and high energy, and the same person gave me like a little confused in terms of like what exactly I probably should ask for like high energy. But
Yeah.
I would like to bring more of like the high energy end instead of the shyness.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that sounds great.
I think, like, kind of listening to what you just said, like, that's kind of how, like, I would describe myself as well. Like, I'm not, like, someone who's gonna, like, like, reach out and, like, make friends with everyone in the room, but, like, I will, like, engage in conversation with people, and, like, once we're close, like, I'll be better. So I think just kind of trying to be more, like, open and, like, going to say hi and introducing myself to people that I haven't met, like, in the office.
I mean, honestly, all the words I got were pretty much, they were kind of similar to how I thought of myself. I mean, I do have the same kind of, I mean, a few people definitely mentioned introverted or something along shy. And I haven't really thought of that as something that we need to work on.
I don't think we do.
I think, like, honestly, it's been playing out. It's just going to be different and change something that's core to what I'm really doing. But I think definitely being able to engage with people will be something.
Nice.
I think everything I got was spot on. Like, I'd like to think I have some sort of self-awareness where, like, I know myself and know what people are going to think of me. And, because, like, I've accepted that, like, what people are going to, like, it's always, like, I'm still the same person I was, like, maybe not exactly, but, like, as I was kind of like a kid, like, very, like, passionate, high energy, and, like, I'd also, like, think I'm reliable, which is what I want people to think. Like, if I'm going to be working, like, someone asks me, hey, can you go run the office for like 2 hours, or can you get this done by this time? I want people to see that. Just let people it's nice.
I think everything I got was accurate to a degree, and I think it's like important to try to present myself as someone that people, like, when they're first meeting me, would be like, oh, I would like to work with that person, or like being stuck at a desk next to that person, like, would be a good experience, not a bad experience.
Yeah, I definitely want to bring in all of these aspects. At the end of the day, like, I want both sides of me to be present at the workspace. And I mean, I don't really know if these are things I should work on or reserve, but
Yeah,
at
and
the end of the day, like, I just want to be me, like, I don't want to, like, change myself.
absolutely, and I think the goal of this exercise is to bring some just self-awareness onto how other people have been perceiving you. And it's not necessarily to say, hey, you should change these things or be completely different. but more so to know how are you showing up, how do people perceive you, and be thoughtful, especially the first week of your internship. Like, you're gonna meet a lot of new people. Like, do you want to be outgoing and like try more so to like initiate conversation with people so you're not hesitant to talk to them 3 weeks later when you see them, you know, at the coffee machine, because you know what their name is. They may not remember your name, but you're like, hey, you know, Marco, I met you that first week, and being able to build those relationships I think would be really helpful, so that you can eventually ask them for an informational interview, see if you can go get a cup of coffee with them, whether that's inside or outside of the office. And so we're going to start, hopefully the sound's going to work, with video. So this is an ad. Can you hear this? That's basically it on the intro. A little bit of cowboying, small amount of horsing around. Wanted to give you kind of an overview of what does it look like, what are the steps, and then we'll break down more information to kind of learn about a new company, make professional connections, and potentially discover job opportunities for after graduation, for your next summer internship. I think it's also important to understand, like, these are relationships you're building, you know, earlier in the semester. we went over networking. Hey, Brendan. Hey. So earlier in the semester, we went over networking. This is one way that you can follow up with somebody you met at a networking event to learn more than just a few-minute conversation, saying, hey, would love to get together for a cup of coffee and an informational interview to learn more about your industry, your job, how you got there. The other thing to note is if you actually spend 30 minutes with somebody, they're probably going to remember you for a long period of time. And we'll go over kind of the best practice of sending a handwritten thank you note within ideally 24 hours, but definitely within a week. And look up what their business address is, or if they work with you, you put it on their desk. It goes a really, really long way. I know there's lots of ways to send an email or a text message and thank them, but if you spend the 60 seconds to write a handwritten thank you note, I just came up with the idea that I'm going to assign all of you by the end of the semester to buy a pack of thank you notes. Then you have no reason. It's the friction of oh, where would I go get a thank you note? Well, I've got this pack of 10, and by the end of the internship, I should write 10 thank you notes. That sounds like a pretty good idea. And the handwritten thank you note is one step, but then you can also follow up with them 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years later. Literally this week, I got an email from a girl who interned for me in 2013. So I hadn't seen her since 2013 or 2014. She's now working at a new startup company, had some questions about getting connected in the DC food industry. And I immediately emailed 4 people I knew, connected with her one right away, sent her a couple links. I was stoked to hear from her, and she was maybe a college sophomore, and now she's 25 and a legit graphic designer. And people want to help you, especially if they invest 30 minutes in you. They're probably willing to invest more time and energy later on in your career. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for a job. It could be for, in this it was connections. How does she understand what's going on in the DC startup world? Could be for customers, for referrals. There's lots of reasons to nurture that relationship after the initial informational interview. So some do's and don'ts we'll go over. Do be mindful of people's times. These are definitely not 2-hour meetings. I think targeting 20 minutes, and if it goes to 30 minutes is fine. I will share a secret though. If you ever want a lot of someone's time, try to schedule a 45-minute meeting, because it's not an hour. However, nobody books themselves for that extra 15 minutes, so if the 45 minutes went well, they're happy to keep going. And I have a few times had 2 to 3 hour meetings with folks that started as a 45-minute meeting, and we hit it off and there's so much to talk about, but that's not really the purpose of an informational interview. This should be a bit quicker, let them get back to work, and certainly don't monopolize the interview talking all about yourself. The goal is to learn about them. Give them a little bit of intro, your background. We'll go over what to send them in an email to schedule it, so that they know what to talk about. You do want to prepare a 30-second elevator pitch. What's your major at Georgetown? What year are you? What's your role this summer? What have you learned so far? What are you hoping to learn over the course of the summer and or in the next 20 minutes with this person? Don't just wing it and show up. Be thoughtful. You've gotten somebody who gets paid more money than you to spend time with you and to share some experience, so think about what knowledge you are hoping to extract. As I mentioned, do send a follow-up thank you note, and don't ask for a favor in that note. Don't be hey, I appreciate the interview, cheers, P.S., can you help me with this thing? That's not the format. Just make it an altruistic thing. If they do, as a course of the conversation and dialogue, offer to do something, whether it's connect to somebody else, follow up with them a few days later, separate from the I'm thanking you thank you note, to say, hey, you mentioned you could introduce me to Carly, just wanted to follow up to see if you could make that introduction. Here's a paragraph about me you can copy and paste to make it even easier to introduce me. Does that make sense? So some pro tips here. Compliment people. Tell them you think they're really smart. You value them, they're wise, you want to be them when they grow up. Stroke that ego a little bit, and people are going to be more and more likely to say, yes, absolutely. You can frame it as, hey, could you take some time out of your busy day? Or, hey, I know your schedule is really busy. Let me know what works best for you. Definitely be willing to accommodate their schedule. And there is a little bit of financial resources you should be prepared to spend here. And by that I mean $10 at Starbucks. But if in an ideal world, you get there first, you don't order anything, you wait for them, and then you wait in line together to order things. You know what you want, you ask what they want, you say, oh, no, this is on me, it's my treat, I appreciate you taking the time. If any of you have ever married an Italian woman like I have, you'll find that they try to pay for every bill, and they're kind of like, no, like, let me get it. And I'm just like, well, sure, if you guys want to pay, it's fine. But you gotta play the game at least a little bit, and in this sense, you do actually want to win the game. Like, it's $5 to $10, and as the recipient who's getting their coffee paid, they're happy. This was free. I thought I might spend $5. They probably make more money and could easily pay for it, but it's nice to be treated. Maybe they don't often get treated. I would not use your company credit card, not that I think you would get it, but like, make this a personal expense. That makes sense, you are getting paid. With the caveat of like, lunch you could probably pay for as well. That shouldn't be more than like $30 or so. But if it's like a fancy 5-course dinner, that's a total different ballgame than what we're talking about here in terms of what you should expect to pay. And then again, on how do you frame it, hey, you seem like you really know a lot about X, Y, and Z. How did you learn so much about it? I'm going to go over a whole list of questions throughout this to help you think about what you want to prep. And some of those questions maybe you put in your notebook, or I would handwrite them more so than like have a printout, but maybe you could have a printout sheet and like put it in a folder and with like space for you to take notes and say, hey, I just want to take notes. When you're genuinely interested and care about what they're going to say, people are excited and they'll talk a little slower. Say, oh, hold on, let me just get that down. How do you spell that? Like, by all means, people know that you want to be learning from what they're doing. So I'll send out the slides. There's a link here to this article. I'm going to ask you politely to never ask anyone to pick their brain. Can you imagine how uncomfortable that would feel if somebody cuts open your scalp and starts like poking stuff in there? Like, that is not how you want to frame this. And every time somebody asks me, I just kind of like, I don't like it. And so there's a response here that this guy on the internet uses, which I have copied and pasted and found to be very effective. Someone's like, let me pick your brain. You say, hey, my time is limited. This isn't your response, it's what the other person might say if you're vague and don't direct where you want to go and don't have a few questions of exactly why. And he does this for a few reasons. One, time is valuable, and just getting a free coffee is not scalable. He's not making any money. But if you read this whole article, what he basically says is, I save a list of all the answers to questions, and I've got a great list, so when somebody actually sends the questions, I just copy and paste the things I've already wrote, send it to them, it's more efficient for him, and then he's like an internet blogger, he's like, and I turn these things into blog posts like every other week when people have asked me for stuff like, oh, what did I send people recently? Great, let me make a blog post about it. He's already written content, it's helping him to actually generate interest in his business, acquire new clients, and kind of build his online personal brand. So informational interview questions. I'll run through these pretty quickly. How did you get here? What did you want to be when you grew up? That's an interesting one to see where you might be able to connect or completely disconnect from what their childhood path was. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to make video games. I studied computer science to make video games. Eventually that turned into, I wanted to design the screens on computers and TVs in movies and TVs that didn't actually have anything behind them that did it, but designing the user interface, so like on CSI it looked really cool when they were doing like the blood test. I thought I would be good at that. I never quite got to that career path. And then the other thing I wanted to do was be a veterinarian, but then I found out in middle school that I was allergic to cats and dogs and rabbits and like all animals, so that didn't work out too well either. You want to understand how long people have been in a certain company and be cognizant that if somebody's worked at this organization for like 20 or 30 years, their view of the organization and the world in general is going to be very different than somebody who's been there a year and had 4 other jobs before they got here. So I would recommend doing both types of interviews, but realizing that like if they're a lifer and they're climbing this corporate ladder for 40 years, they may be in a different mindset and track than you, who might be interested in exploring a few different jobs in your 20s for 2 to 5 years, seeing what you like, what roles work well, what industries interest you, asking people where did they work before, and understanding how did they make the jump from job A to job B is interesting, and like what happened, and you might find out that like they got passed over for promotion, or they didn't get a raise, or like a recruiter cold reached out to them, or their friend they used to work with went to this company and said, hey, you should join too. That works a lot. And you might even learn ideas about how you could think about strategically picking your second or third job in your career. Another question asking, what do you wish you knew when you were my age? Let them be, wise and stroke their gray beard or whatever it is, and dispel some wisdom of like, well, when I was your age, I wish I knew this. I don't know what they're going to say, but it's good to learn. And then figuring out, especially if it's somebody in your company, so who in the organization gets shit done? Like, who do you think are the most productive people? And in your mind, you're like, I want to have an informational interview with them and figure out what are their systems and processes for doing all of these things. And then off the record, from your experience, like who in the organization kind of slows things down with bureaucracy? And it's helping you build this org chart in your head of who are the doers and who are the slow and stuff downers, which don't hang out with them, emulate them, and figure out how you can help. So is there anything you wish you knew, you would have known before starting out in this industry? That's a great one too, to maybe help you realize that this is not the industry you want to go into, or maybe it is. And you'll ideally do these informational interviews not just with people in your company, but with other companies. I bet you could even ask one another to do an informational interview with somebody at somebody else's company, see what I did there, and then you don't have to work there, but you can come over, hang out, have coffee with two folks. You don't even have to leave, by the way. Like, you could just do it in the office if there's a coffee maker and it's free, by all means. And Charlie, I know you drink a lot of coffee, but if anybody doesn't and you want to have a water or iced tea, that's totally fine as well. Just the idea of like having a coffee chat. I will often invite people who want to meet me over to Halcyon and say, oh yeah, come over for a coffee chat. I don't drink coffee at all, but it at least frames it as like, we're going to sit down for 20 minutes, talk about stuff, and then I'm going to take a leave because I got other work to do. Politely. So you can also ask kind of what do people like best or worst about a specific industry. And similar to kind of how you're developing an entrepreneurial mindset about what products or services, you could just like, basically, what are the hypotheses that you want to test? And you have hypotheses about your interests, about certain industries or roles, or career paths that you think are going to be great. Figure out questions to ask that can prove or disprove that. And then also understanding what experience did they have or leverage to get into this specific job or this field, so that you can start to think about, hey, I'm 20 now, when I'm 28, what do I need to have on my resume to do the things that I think I want to do as I'm entering my 30s? For example, I went to grad school when I was 23 because I knew at some point in life I wanted to get my master's in computer science. And I also knew at like 20, I decided by age 40 I wanted to be a college professor. I'm 33 and here talking with y'all tonight, it's pretty cool. And I knew to be a professor, you needed to have an advanced degree. And at 23, I lived with a med student who was in med school for the next 2.5 years. I figured that was a great time to do a 2.5-year master's program. And I was single and didn't really have much going on in terms of time commitments. So understanding, are there things, whether it's grad school, could you do it part-time or full-time? Are there certain roles that you just have to be somebody's like grunt for 2 years? I'm thinking like if you climb certain political Capitol Hill ladders, like you got to be a staffer, you got to do annoying, obnoxious things, so eventually you move up. Or in like the movie industry, there's so many like low level, you don't get paid, you get lunches and set up food and like just run around and do whatever. But then one day magically maybe you're a producer. I don't know how that works exactly, but again, neither one of those industries interests me whatsoever, but that's my like from a distance perspective of like what are the stepping stones in your career you need to have to level up. Another great question is, what does an average day look like? Like, can you just walk me through like what time do you wake up? And depending on how it goes, like ask people like, what's your morning routine? Like, what do you do from when your alarm goes off to when you get in the office? You might be able to learn some things there. It's also interesting to talk to people that have families and understand like, do they have to get up at 6 a.m. to spend 2 hours with their kids and like get them dressed and brush their teeth and fed and like drive them to school? That's a whole layer ball of stress that I don't deal with, thank God. And I know is challenging when you think about getting to work and having a clear mind and like, how do they juggle that? And then what do you do throughout the day? When do you have meetings? Do you have certain weekly, monthly, whatever it is? Understand what their kind of a day in the life of them is like. And you can also decide if some of those things sound great and you'd love to do that for most of your career, or if you're like, hell no, I don't want to touch that, that sounds terrible. And then great, that's how you're acquiring all this information to inform yourself on the career path you want to chart. And then last but not least here, what type of personality works well in this office culture? Different organizations may have like a bro culture, which I'm not going to endorse or whatever here, but being aware as a woman, like what's that going to be like? And are people like constantly high-fiving and chest bumping and like playing beer pong, you know, or are there the other end of the spectrum? Is everybody super extroverted and opinionated and they want to like argue and debate all these things? Or are most people pretty quiet and they just like put their headphones in and get stuff done, and if you talked more than once an hour, people would be like, shut up, intern, I'm working. So figuring that out, I think, is helpful. You can also ask, you know, what's the best way to get my foot in the door? And hint, it's probably an introduction from this person to somebody they know. Connecting back to the family question, how does your job affect your life outside the office? Like some lawyers and some people work, you know, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. It makes it really hard to have a social life, to be able to work out, eat healthy. Some people may be like, oh, it's great. I get in at 9:30, I leave at 4:30. You know, I do all of these things that are a ton of fun. You should do them too. And you know, I don't check my email after 5 p.m. and it's not a big deal. There's a whole spectrum of what does that life look like, and like what are your weekends like? Are you able to unplug? You know, and then you can also ask, you know, what resources or organizations, especially if you've expressed interest in either the place they work or the industry, like what are other folks I should research online, I could learn about, and then always ask for referrals. You know, even if it goes really badly, still like try to find somebody else that they know that they could put you in touch with. And there's a link here to another set of 50 questions. So now we've got a simple email template for reaching out to folks to get these interviews. If you work with people within a 100-foot radius, probably just do this in person. Like just pop over to their desk and be like, hey, what's your schedule look like next Thursday? You know, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee for a little informational interview. If you want, you can even say this is like an assignment for the program. Like, feel free to blame or credit me for why it is you want to have these informational interviews. But really say like, hey, I want to learn, I'm so early in my career, stroke that ego, compliment them, all of the things you know, would love to be able to apply that myself. If you don't know somebody, you get connected, you know, put in the subject line, hey, John Doe recommended I request an informational interview with you. Get straight to the point. Hi, Mrs. Smith. You are being more formal there, you're being deferential, you haven't met this person before. And you can tweak and paraphrase this based on the context, but you know, I'm exploring opportunities in the area that you work in and would love to learn from someone experienced as you are. I met with John last week, and at the end of that interview I asked him for contacts